Hey friends, wherever you are joining us right now from around the world, listening or watching to this message, we hope that the grace of God is meeting you in this season like never before. And speaking of this season, it is the Advent season. And so we are in our series, our Advent series based on Isaiah 9, 6 through 7. The series is called All Hail the King. We hope these messages encourage you, they inspire you, and they move you closer and closer to the God who loves you. Wherever you are watching this from, we hope that you are encouraged. And for all of you who support this ministry financially, we are so incredibly grateful for your generosity. We could not bring these messages to you without your generosity. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Now again, enjoy this message. Let it encourage you. Let it inspire you. If you're ever in the Denver area, we'd love to see you Sunday mornings at 9 and 11. But until then, go in God's grace, go in God's peace, and Merry Christmas. All right, Isaiah chapter 9, verse 2 and then 6 and 7. Read this with me if you desire. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shined. Verse 6. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it, with justice and with righteousness, from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. Luke chapter 2, verse 1 through 7. In those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all of the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. And all went down to be registered, each to his own town. And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the town of Nazareth to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them in the inn. This is the word of the Lord. You can have a seat. Christmas time. The time is here. Christmas is here. In the words of the immortal NSYNC, it's the wonderful time of year. School is out. It's time to scream and shout. The lyrics are absolutely fantastic if you're asking me. Christmas time, it's that time of year where if we pay careful attention, you will notice that there is a collision of two worlds. You walk into your favorite store to buy whatever it is that you think you might need or whatever gift that people might want. And you're awakened to the reality that something is different about this store. It's the one time of year that it looks absolutely different. There are Christmas trees and lights and ornaments wherever you go. You go to your favorite coffee shop, or let's say you go to Starbucks, and we, I think, could all agree that Starbucks as an organization, as a company, does not value or teach the ways of Jesus. And yet, while you are there waiting in line for your chai, not your chai tea, just your chai. Can we thank God that the new CEO of Starbucks is an Indian, and in his first order of business, he got rid of chai tea. It's just chai. It's just chai. And while you're there drinking your chai, you happen to notice that in the speakers over you is playing, "Hark the herald angels sing, glory to the newborn King. Mild he lays in glory by, born that no one else should ever die, that the sons of earth would receive a second birth." There in the midst of this season, the entire summary of the Christian teaching is being played everywhere you go. That God would come down in the form of his son, Jesus, fully human, fully God, and go to the cross one day and die so that none of us who believe in him would ever have to die. Christmas is this collision of two worlds, and no matter how we try to, as a culture, get around it, we cannot escape the fact that the reason that the season exists is because in this world has come who Isaiah calls the Wonderful Counselor, the Mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, who has come to rescue and to save humanity. Advent, Adventus, meaning the arrival, is the time for the church to remind ourselves that in fact there are two arrivals. The first arrival is the birth of King Jesus, who came in humility, but he will come again in glory to rule and to reign forever. And in this truth and in this promise is where we put our faith. In fact, Advent, week 2 of Advent, as we look at the Advent candle, is all about faith. Mary and Joseph received the promise that God would come, the Messiah would come, and somehow God would move through them and bring the Messiah. And in that spirit of faith, they go all the way to Bethlehem, where the Messiah is born. Faith in the mighty God who has come for us. In fact, I would contend that what Advent is reminding us of in this season, for those who are followers of Jesus, and if you're not a follower of Jesus, this invitation is for you also, that our faith is to be anchored in the power of God. In other words, there is no situation, no circumstance, no trial, no opposition in your life that God does not have full, not partial, full authority and power over every aspect of your life, because he is in fact mighty God. He is able to do all that which he desires to do and to accomplish. When I was a kid in the church, we sang this little song, which I loved. It went like this: our God is so big, so strong, and so mighty, there's nothing our God cannot do. So this section grew up going to church. This section is like, what kind of church is this? And this section probably grew up just Keisters, right? Christmas and Easter. That's this, am I right? There was this other song we used to sing too. How'd it go? It went, what a mighty God we serve. What a mighty God we serve. Angels bow before him. Heaven and earth adore him. What a mighty God we serve. Again, only this section. Again. And we grew up singing this song, and Isaiah reminds us that the name of God who has come is that he is mighty God. It's not simply what he does, it's who he is. It's the essence of his nature. He is mighty God, able to do that which he wants to do in this world. And he can do all things by the power of his might. And in this power and in Jesus, the coming king, the arrived and soon to come king, we put our faith. The psalmist in Psalm 20 verse 7 puts it this way. He says, some put their faith in chariots, some in horses, but we put our faith in the name of the Lord. And Christmas is the season of faith, isn't it? Isn't every movie, every song, every part of our culture telling you to put your faith in someone or something? We put our faith not just in the Christmas season, but maybe that this would be the miracle season of the United States men's soccer team. It's not our time, but it's coming, because we love you, we love you, we love you, and where we go, we'll follow. Listen, it's a catchy song. It is a catchy song. 4 years, it's our time, it's coming, 4 years. We're told to put our faith in love, that love will conquer all things. We're told to put our faith in our fellow man. In fact, we're told to believe in the Christmas season, and we have movies and we have these charts that, oh my gosh, the Christmas spirit is low, and we have to believe more in the magic of Christmas. And when we believe in the magic of Christmas, the spirit of Christmas will rise up, and we will overcome all of our problems, and our families will be healed, and our cities will be restored, because somewhere deep down in our souls, we know that we are a people living in darkness. We know deep down that there is a darkness around us. This we know. But when we're quiet enough and honest enough to admit it, we also know there is a darkness within us. When the scriptures speak of darkness, as Isaiah does, it is referring to a world that is marked by sin and suffering. This is in fact how you could describe the world in the time of the prophet Isaiah. You could describe the world this way in the time of the birth of Jesus, a world that is marked by sin and suffering, violence, injustice, greed, infanticide, racism, oppression, darkness. In fact, it's not too far of the stretch of the imagination to see that this is the world we live in today. Darkness, violence, oppression, injustice, greed. We live in a world where abortion is heralded as a human right, and where the death penalty is celebrated as justice. We live in a world today where a recent study would suggest that 1.4 billion people are living in poverty. And I don't mean the kind of poverty where you have to decide between Netflix and Hulu this month. 1.4 billion people live on less than $1 a day. In fact, by the time this month comes to an end, estimates tell us that 41 million people will die because of preventable diseases. We live in a world where pornography is celebrated, though it is a demonic creation. And pornography this year, as in every year, will make more money than the NFL, the NBA, Major League Baseball, and the NHL combined. We live in a world where truth is no longer actually true, but all that God has designed in marriage and in sexuality and in family, all of that is rejected for whatever subjective truth the culture wants to put forward. Would this not be a description of darkness? And on top of that, what the scripture wants to remind us of is not only is the world dark because it is full of sin and suffering, but the darkness within the darkness is that the people living in that darkness have no ability to get out of that darkness. In other words, the true darkness in your life is when you are utterly and in every way powerless. That's darkness. To know that you are utterly powerless against what you are facing. The insurmountable odds against you. The generational curses that have lived inside of your family from one generation to the next. Your body that is failing you. Your relationships that are broken and fractured. The marriage that is almost at its end. A life of perpetual loneliness where you feel powerless to end it. And in this, Isaiah says, there is a promise that is coming. And in my time remaining, I simply want to encourage you of what the scriptures are telling us and what Isaiah tells us. Isaiah is telling us that in the midst of this darkness, in the midst of those moments where you feel powerless, where you feel that you have to take control of the situation. You have got to control the narrative of your life. You have got to make every decision because God cannot be trusted and your family cannot be trusted and people cannot be trusted. In those moments where you feel that you are powerless, the promise of the scriptures and what Isaiah wants to remind you of this Advent season is that God has made a promise to you, to us, to his people, and that God not only makes that promise, but God is powerful enough to deliver on what he has promised. Whenever I think of promises, I think of my kids. I got 4 kids, 4 boys. My youngest one is 10 months old. He has no idea what I say. He just thinks I'm awesome. I mean, there's nothing else about it. But my other 3 kids, I gotta be really careful. Parents, you gotta be careful because your kids will find you at the most opportune moments for them. When you are distracted, when you don't know what you're saying, and they will get you to promise something. And you don't remember that you made that promise. Can I get an amen from any parents in the house? But they remember you made that promise. And they will say, Dad, you promised us that you take us to Legoland this summer. It's like, what? I'm not taking I get you a Lego, that's about it. I'm not even at Legoland. Let's go to Target. And I was like, I never made that promise. And then Hannah's like, and there's something interesting about when you make a promise to your kids, you begin to sort of look at the posture of your children and you begin to see what faith looks like. That they are holding on to this promise that my dad said something and he's gonna come through. And there's this sort of holy anticipation that your children have. I wonder if that's why Jesus said you should have faith like a child. Believing that what was promised will be delivered. And they hold on to this promise. And what Isaiah wants to remind you of this Advent season is that in the midst of darkness, there is a promise that the light of Christ has come. That light has come in darkness. Because what you need in darkness, church, what you need when you feel powerless is not strategy. What you don't need is more information. What you don't need is to increase your intellectual capacity. What you don't need is to have more resources to figure out how to get out of this. What you need in darkness is light. A light that will guide you into the future. A light that will sustain you in a world where your circumstances feel overwhelming. And Isaiah says there is a light that has come. Now, when Isaiah uses that word light, it is clear in the scriptures that he is referencing or speaking of the same kind of light as what the sun brings. In darkness, when the sun comes up, what does it reveal? The sun reveals life and truth and goodness. And in a way far greater, when the light of Christ enters into your darkest moments, what does Jesus bring? Light and life and truth and all that is good. Perhaps this is why Jesus says that I am the way of goodness. I am the truth of all things. I am the life you are looking for. He promises you that in darkness there is goodness. Listen, no matter what you are facing this Christmas season, this Advent season, the promise of God is that he comes to bring in that moment, in your situation, in whatever you are facing in your life and in your family and in this moment in history and in time, he has come to bring you life and truth and all that is good. And Isaiah wants to summarize this together, and he says the promise of God is coming. There are 8,810 promises in the scriptures that I find their fulfillment in Jesus. And what Isaiah wants to say is that the announcement that was made about the coming Messiah in Isaiah has arrived and has been described by Luke. That the coming Messiah, the one, this child, this son, he was born in Bethlehem. The promise that was announced has arrived. And if you could summarize all of God's promises for you in one sentence, it would be this: friends, God has not abandoned you. When you feel powerless, what you are feeling is that the world has abandoned you, that people have abandoned you. And the worst feeling of all is that God himself has abandoned you. So Isaiah, speaking to the people of God who will soon find themselves under the oppression of the Assyrians in the north and the Babylonians in the south, is reminding them that the covenant-loving God is the covenant-keeping God, and God will not abandon you. In your worst moment, God will not forget you. Anyone feel forgotten today in this place? Is there anyone here where the disease has taken its toll, and at some point you had faith and you trusted and you trusted and you trusted, and now what you feel is God must have forgotten me? Is anyone here where you are trying to do everything you can to hold on to this relationship, and you are doing everything in your power, trying everything, fighting for everything, but at some point the whisper enters into your mind that says God has forgotten you? Is there anyone in this room where the average age is 26? And at some point have you thought to yourself, there is a life of insurmountable debt. There is a life of insurmountable odds against me. Have you ever thought to yourself, I can't afford to live in this city. So what I'll do is I'll just take control over the situation. And I'll tell myself that because God won't provide for me, now I won't say that out loud, I'll just make up stuff. Oh no, God's calling me somewhere else. Never fully trusting that the God who brought you to it is the same God who has the power to see you through it. Man, Christians, we're so good at justifying stuff, aren't we? And we're better than, we could write the book on it. We could write the book on control. We could write the book on taking power into our own hands. But the promise of Advent is that there is a God of infinite power, mighty God, who is over and sovereign over everything in your life. There is nothing in your life, not one thing, no matter how small you think it is or how insignificant you feel that it is, there is nothing in your life, nothing in my life, nothing in this church, nothing in the global church, nothing in this world that God does not have power over. And the promise of God is that he has not forgotten you. He has not abandoned you. So in my time remaining, I want to encourage you with three quick things, just three things. The first is this. Advent is the great reminder, the beautiful reminder, the good news. It's not good advice. Advent is the good news that what God has declared, he has delivered. What God has declared, he has delivered. For unto us a child is born. Isaiah does not say, for unto us a child shall be born, for unto us a child is born. And he will come in the most natural way. But he won't just be any child, because he is a son who is given, which means though he comes as a child in the most natural way, he is a son. He is a divine gift given by God to the world. And when he comes, he will come to rule and reign in the line of David. And every government in the world will sit upon his shoulders. He will have full sovereign authority over every single power in this world. And his kingdom will have no end. It doesn't renew every 4 years. He has no end to his kingdom. He will rule with justice and with equity and with righteousness. And what Jesus will do for the powerless is he will create for himself and in himself a new family. Scripture makes the point that the most powerless people in the world, you know who they are? Orphans. In our world today, there is no one more vulnerable than orphans. An orphan has no power. An orphan has no identity. An orphan has no provision. But God is creating for himself, taking a group of orphans, black orphans, white orphans, poor orphans, rich orphans, Singaporean orphans, Chinese orphans, Indian orphans, Sri Lankan orphans, Iranian orphans. He's taking orphans and putting them together and creating for himself one family of God. Wasn't it beautiful that we did this candle in Mandarin? What a beautiful language. I took French in high school. What a waste of a language. I mean, I should have taken something else. Bonjour, monsieur. I wish I took something else. God is creating for himself a new family. Paul says this in Galatians 4. He says, for when the fullness of time had come, when God looked at the world and he said, this is enough. When the fullness of time had come, God sent forth his son to be born of a woman, to be born under the law, to redeem those, to rescue orphans, that he would call us sons and daughters of God. You know who now has power in the family of God? Sons and daughters, because we live under the power of God who controls all things. If you are a child of the living God, all of the resources of heaven are available to you. We live with God's provision. We live with God's protection under his mighty hand, under his mighty arm that he has revealed in the person and the work of Jesus. God creates for himself a people, and he says to his people, be anchored in my power and in my unchanging promise. Last year, my friends hoodwinked me into going deep sea fishing. Do I look like the kind of guy who wants to go deep sea fishing? I want to stay on land. I want to know that if there's something that's going to happen, I can get out of this situation. But there we are in the middle of where the Pacific meets the Sea of Cortez, and we are out in the middle of the ocean. I cannot see land anymore, and I am doing I get motion sickness when I'm at Wash Park and I see people running. Okay, I get motion sickness for everything. And I got wristbands on. I got all this stuff around my neck, and I'm snorting Dramamine. I'm on all kinds of stuff. I mean, I got ginger ale. I got peppermint. I got like a Camelback with peppermint going into my nose, just trying to stay balanced. And for a while, I'm good. Like, okay, this is good. I could do this. I could do this. But then we get out where it's real choppy. You know, the kind of places where they throw your body overboard and say there was an accident. I mean, we were that deep. And I'm starting to get a little disoriented. It's feeling a little chaotic. I'm getting dizzy. And I don't know, I'm just losing my mind. And so the captain, he says, hey, come back to the back with me. So he takes me to the back and he says, I want you to anchor yourself and anchor your feet here so your body is staying still in the midst of this choppy water. And then he says something. He says, now I want you to look at the horizon, because the horizon is fixed and it is unchanging. When you are in the midst of choppy water, you've got to anchor yourself and keep your eyes fixed on what is unchanging. Tim Keller says that this world is a very dark place, and we will never find our way or see reality unless Jesus is our light. The promise of Advent is that in the midst of choppy waters, in the midst of feeling powerless and you don't know where you're going, and you don't know how it'll end, you must anchor yourself and keep your eyes fixed on what is unchanging. And what is unchanging is the power of God and the promise of Jesus. And the way in which you do this, the way in which you stay anchored, is called faith. See, in the space between what God has declared and the time in which God delivers, that space, that journey is called faith. I think of the story of Mary McLeod Bethune. One autobiographer says that between the years of 1933 and 1945, she was the most influential African American in the United States. She was an advisor to 3 presidents. And she writes in her autobiography, how is an African American woman in the 1930s, before Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, how is a woman who faces insurmountable racism and bigotry and hatred, how does she go on to influence 3 presidents? How does she go on to start a 4-year university? She pens a little essay titled, How God Has Helped Me. And in this essay, she writes this. She says, I am very conscious of the ever-increasing power of God all through the years. He is my sustaining power, comforting and controlling the way I take. The way forward, the way to remain anchored, is to hold your faith in the power of God. And faith isn't this sort of childlike fantasy. It's not wishful thinking. This past week at prayer night, Pastor Trevor shared this idea of hope and faith and wishful thinking. And he told a story about how every year he really wanted this Lego set and his parents would never get it for him. Turns out it wasn't hope or faith, it was just wishful thinking. And I understand this. I understand the sort of tension between faith and wishful thinking. I moved to this country and I realized that when you graduate high school, which where I come from is just what you're supposed to do, but when you graduate from high school here, your parents throw you a party. It's an epic party. And I had faith that my parents would do this for me. And so I would remind them like, Dad, it's senior year. It's senior year, I get my party, and I'd remind him of this over and over and over again, till one time my dad had enough and he said, no, this is not a white family. No party for you. Maybe I'll get you a CD player, 5 discs, it'll be very good. And he did, he got a CD player. But here's the thing that he said. He said, I never promised you a party. I never promised you that. See, part of the problem is we are holding God accountable to things we demand that he never declared, rather than knowing what he actually declared. So if you want to experience in faith the deliverance of what God has declared, hey, you gotta know what he said. What has he actually said about your situation? What has he actually said about your life? What has he actually said about the markets that seem unstable and the ever-increasing prices and inflation? What has God said? God has said that he would never leave you or forsake you. God has said that no weapon formed against you can prosper. God has said that in all things that you will see the goodness of God in the land of the living. See, according to Hebrews, faith is not wishful thinking. Faith, according to Hebrews 11:1, is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things unseen, which means your faith must be rooted in the power of what God can do and the promise of what God has said. That's what faith is. By faith, Moses gets all the way to the Red Sea, and as he stands there, God opens the sea for the people. By faith, Joshua steps into the Jordan, and then the Jordan opens up. By faith, Gideon takes an army of 300 to fight 10,000 Midianites. By faith, David has a little stone and a sling to fight a giant that is against the living God. By faith, Esther walks into the king and says, though it is against the law, I will stand before the king, and if I perish, then I perish. By faith, Mary and Joseph hear what God has promised and move to Bethlehem, and Jesus says by faith, you can look at Pikes Peak and you can say, move, and it shall be moved. By faith. By faith. But the problem is, we, much like the people of God, we, much like the Israelites, we are a people who are faithless. Now, one of the most confronting things that Jesus says to the people, he says, "Oh, faithless generation, how long am I to be with you?" Now, is that true? Are we faithless? Jesus is not saying we're faithless in everything. We're just faithless in him. Because we're quite a faithful people, are we not? I would contend in America 2022, we are faithful in two very big things. Number one, self-reliance. We are a people who love self-reliance. I'll do it my way, with my time, with my talent, with my money, with my resources, and whatever anyone owes me, self-reliance. And I would tell you this, friends, there's nothing more detrimental to you becoming who God has called you to be than a life of self-reliance and autonomy. The most detrimental thing to your faith is not who's in the White House, is not who's running school districts, who's running Disney or Pixar. The most detrimental thing to your faith is you trusting yourself to do what only God can do. And the second thing that we trust is human innovation. We trust in technology, we trust in medicine, we trust in the market, we trust in politicians, we trust in whatever it is that we can come up with in our own mind. And the saddest part about this is, or perhaps we could say the most fascinating part about this is, we continue to trust things and people who continually overpromise and underdeliver. And we do it repeatedly. This would be one of the definitions of insanity, to do the same thing over and over and over again, hoping for a different result. We keep trusting the same people over and over and over again. And what's even more sad is we trust ourselves. We put trust in all kinds of stuff, don't we? I mean, heck, I trust these little pills, these little dairy pills that are supposedly supposed to counter-react what ice cream does to my body. It only happens like 5 out of 10 times it works, but I still trust it. I mean, can we praise God for the guy who figured out how to come up with almond milk? I mean, my gosh, he found an almond, he took the udders and he milked it and he gave us this beautiful creation. We could put our trust in this thing. We put our trust in all sorts of things. We even trust ourselves. But listen, I've said this before, I'll say it again. Who has lied to you more than anyone else in this world? Listen, before you blame your spouse, "Oh my gosh, he's such a liar." Before you blame your parents, before you blame the government, before you blame your pastor, before you blame the church, because the church gets blamed for everything. You hate every part of your life, and the lowest common denominator is the church. So like, I'll leave the church because I can leave that. I can't leave everything else. But who has lied to you more than you've lied to you? You've lied to you more than anyone else, and yet you keep trusting yourself as if this version of truth will be different than yesterday's version of truth. And what's even worse than this, the most tragic thing in the life of followers of Jesus, and in my 22 now years of professional Christianity, I can tell you what I see repeatedly over and over again. The most tragic thing that I see in the life of Christians is they never actually put themselves in a position to trust God. They trust their money, they trust the market, they trust their own decisions. I've heard so many Christians tell me, we're gonna go here because whatever. And my question is, well, okay, but is that what God is calling you to? Is that what God is leading you to? Is that God's vision for your family? Is that God's vision for your dating? Is that God's vision for your marriage? Is that God's vision for your children? And virtually every time, that conversation never happened. It's just, how do I take control and power over my own life? Because what we cannot stand is to feel powerless. We cannot stand the feeling. It leads us into a life of tragic, crippling fear. But the promise of Advent is that we are anchored in the power of God. See what Isaiah could have just said the promise. He could have just said, a light is coming, joy is on the way, new life is beginning. But he goes on in verse 6 to tell us, for unto us a child is born. Why does he do this? Because Isaiah knows that a promise is only as good as the person who is able to deliver it is. What good is a promise if a person can't keep the promise? My gosh, it's like calling Comcast customer service. If you work at Comcast, no offense, but you know how hard it is. Like, man, get me someone on the phone who has some power. Am I right? Am I the only one? And the guy's like, hello, welcome to Comcast. My name is Brad Pitt. No, it's not Brad Pitt. Patel, give me someone with some power over here. What good is a promise if you have no power to deliver on that promise? And what Isaiah wants to tell you is the one who makes the promise is the one who is powerful enough to accomplish it. And who is the one with power? For unto us a child is born, a son is given, fully God and fully man. Of all of the miracles in the world, in all of the miracles in human history, this would be the most profound miracle. Now you might say, no, the most profound miracle is Jesus walking on water. Is Jesus healing the sick? Is Jesus healing the blind and the lame? No, it's Jesus calling Lazarus out from the tomb. No, it's Jesus who actually went on the cross and he resurrected from the cross. Well, listen, all of that is believable if he's God. For unto us a child is born, a son is given, God in the flesh, incarnate. The Bible says the fullness of God was pleased to dwell in him. But the next question you have to ask is, well, what's his name? If I'm to look for the one who is able to deliver on what he said he would do, what's his name? And Isaiah says his name is Mighty God. In the one sense, this means one who is valiant and strong in battle, but Isaiah wants to go even further. He's saying Mighty God is Yahweh himself, the creator of all things, the sustainer of all life, the one who speaks all things into motion, Yahweh, who has the power to heal and to restore. You feel powerless? Who you need is Mighty God, Yahweh, who humbles himself in the form of a child, who enters into the darkness, who enters into your darkness. He enters into your failing body. He enters in to your trauma, to your abuse, your past, your guilt, your shame, your secrets. He enters into your darkness. And what does he bring? He brings the radiance of the image of God. He brings the one who holds all things in the palm of his hand, because he is the beginning and the end, the first and the last. He is the Lion of Judah, the Rose of Sharon, the Balm of Gilead. He is the way, the truth, and the life. He is the Good Shepherd. He is the one who cares. He is the one who is all loving. He is in all things all powerful to you. And what does he accomplish for you? In his power, he defeats the darkness that you could not defeat. Listen, no matter how hard you try, you cannot defeat the power of sin and death over your life. Now you might say, I'm a good person, and you might be. But you know in the depths of your soul, there is a darkness inside of you. There is an anger, an unforgiveness, a bitterness. There is a loneliness. There is an orphan spirit inside of you that you cannot overcome with no matter what neighborhood you live in, what degree you might have, how many children you might have, how great your marriage is, what job or occupation you have. You know within the depths of your soul, if you had 2 seconds to be honest with yourself, that there is a darkness inside of you. And the only thing that can overcome sin is someone who is more powerful than that sin. So Jesus accomplishes on the cross for you. He pays for the penalty of your sin because he's the only one powerful enough to do it. But then he goes into that tomb. And when he comes out of that tomb, he once and for all breaks the power of sin and death over you. As the old hymn writer would say, he breaks the power of canceled sin. He sets the prisoner free. And then one day he will come and he will establish his new kingdom, where he will rule and reign forever and eradicate the very presence of darkness. Listen, there will be, young singles, no more perpetual loneliness. There will be no more Christmases of more questions asked of, hey, is this the year? Is this the year you're bringing someone home? There will be no more families struggling, is this the test that will give us the child that we've been praying for? There will be no more darkness of having to hold in your hands a sick and dying child. There will be no more fear of living in an economy that you cannot control. There will be no more gloom. There will be no more tears of, God, you know how I've prayed for this child over and over again. Would you bring them back to you? There will be no more sickness or failing body. There will be no more of those who are in older seasons of life, regretting all that they should have done and could have done, but yet now their bodies are old and failing them and time is running out. There will be no more disease. He will eradicate it forever. And here's what I love about Advent. For the early church, this wasn't how they ended their year. It's how they began. Because they lived long enough to know, man, the days are long and the years are longer. And so we're gonna go into the year as a people, reminding us that in persecution and in trial and in suffering, that in all things God has not abandoned us. We are not powerless because he is all powerful. And I'll end with this. Man, I love my kids because you know what my kids do? When it comes to promises, they hold me accountable to what I've said. Not in a way that's arrogant. It's actually quite in ways of humility. Especially my 7-year-old Eli. I mean, you cannot make a promise. That kid has some sort of Holy Spirit supernatural memory. I don't know where it comes from. He says, Dad, in 2018, it was December 12th. I believe it was 55 degrees outside. You were wearing a nice flannel, reading Dietrich Bonhoeffer. I believe you were sitting right there in the corner of the couch, 2018, in the year of our Lord. And you said that you would take us to the San Diego Zoo. And I'm just here to hold you accountable to that promise. Man, friends, that's what we get to do with God, not in a way that's arrogant, but in all humility. God, you said, when I feel powerless, that you would deliver on what you declared. God, when I feel lonely and tired and angry and frustrated and fragmented and confused and at a loss, you promised. And so I'm just holding you accountable. And the prophet Isaiah says, and the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do it. It is God's passion to deliver on what he has declared.